Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Krumwiede, Dean of the Architecture Division at California College of the Arts. On behalf of everyone here, I'd like to welcome you to this event, The Future of Learning, which marks the launch of CCA Architecture's academic alliance with the Autodesk Technology Centers. This is the last event in our 2021 Architecture Division lecture series, Remaking, through which we're reflecting upon the work we must do now to remake our disciplines and practices so that we can co-imagine and cooperatively build a just future. You can see recordings of all of our events this past year, along with stories by and about our students, faculty, alumni, and guests at Scaffold, CCA Architecture's web platform, which can be found at scaffold.architecture.cca.edu. Before we begin, it's customary at CCA to share a land acknowledgement. At the college, we understand land acknowledgement as a transformative act meant to confront our places on native lands and to build mindfulness of our present participation in colonial legacies. California College of the Arts campuses are located on the unceded ancestral territories of Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you're joining us virtually today. We recognize the sovereignty of these nations and advocate for the inclusion of indigenous resources and practices into traditional art and design practices. I'd like to thank Athena Moore, Yuri Cataldo, and Rick Rundell of Autodesk, and Margaret, Ikeda, and Nagor Kalanthar, faculty here at CCA, and Dustin Smith, our Director of Academic Administration in the Architecture Division, for the work they've done to make this alliance possible. I'm excited for the future of this project. I'd now like to introduce Margaret Ikeda, co-director of CCA's Architectural Ecologies Lab, to kick off this event.
I welcome everyone. Negar and I, along with Gabby, are incredibly happy to welcome all you to this event today. We are really grateful for Keith and Rick and Sophia to be part of our panel today to discuss the future of learning in regards to industry and academia convergence. So I want to begin today by introducing you to Autodesk Technology Center through Gabriel. Gabby, you might be muted, I think.
Okay, there we go.
There you go. There you go.
All right, well, thank you, Margaret. It's very exciting to be here and to have a moment to celebrate the work that Autodesk and CCA are doing together through this academic alliance. But first, my name is Gabby Patton, and I'm a community specialist on the Autodesk Technology Centers team. And for me, Autodesk is a really exciting place to spend my time because our design make software supports so many different industries. This brings a ton of different perspectives to our space, and it really gets interesting when the lines between these industries begin to blur. Workflows and solutions that might have been used by a single industry are converging with others to reveal new design and make possibilities. Next slide. At the Autodesk Technology Centers, we get to support forward-looking projects and elevate them through the power of connection. We're supporting a global network of innovation leaders and connecting them to data-enabled fabrication workshops, curated experiences, forward-thinking ideas to empower these teams to discover new possibilities together. Next slide. This global network of innovators is known as the Autodesk Technology Center's Outside Network. From startups to customers, academic teams to industry teams, our Outside Network residents share a passion for researching and accelerating design and make technologies in their respective spaces. There's a curiosity and openness to explore and share knowledge that I come across again and again in our resident teams. And that certainly includes the teams we work with at CCA. Next slide. Whether it's exploring on the ideas of design or testing new methods for production, the Outside Network acts as a connection engine where teams can combine cross-industry or cross-continent collaborations with hands-on construction and fabrication to develop their concepts. Collaborations and connections in the network take on many forms, including consultations with subject matter experts, project collaboration with other network teams, and access to tons of diverse programming to learn from the challenges and successes of other teams. Next slide. And in the case of CCA's past work in the program, the mid and final reviews sessions of studio work stand out as they've exposed our resident teams to some really exciting, thought-provoking work, and it's also provided CCA students with direct feedback from industry experts. The evolution of our long relationship with CCA has been really exciting to be a part of. I've worked with so many students and studios, and it always keeps our lives so interesting at the technology centers. Our many past experiences has allowed us to better understand and align our shared goals and find even more opportunities for mutual benefit, again, greater insight into the potential opportunities of connecting with academia to industry, and continue to find ways to leverage our unique resources to propel one another forward. So finally, in conclusion, as hard as this year has been, the future opportunities present in this academic alliance are a very exciting thing to look forward to. So with that, I want to pass it back to Margaret with CCA to learn more about the studios.
Thanks, Gabby. So, Autodesk Technology Center really has been a second home, hosting our studios in their private workshop for conversations with stakeholders over the years, and in their more formal space overlooking the bay for reviews. Since our work is centered on the oceans and the ecologies of the bay, the ability to literally bring our students and guests, reviewers, to visit the tech center with the stunning backdrop of the city and the bay immediately immerses us into the context of our research work. I'm Margaret Ikeda, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of the Architecture Ecologies Lab, along with Evan Jones and Adam Marcus. Architecture Ecologies Lab literally was catalyzed by Autodesk in 2014 and has since grown into a significant research group leading the way in innovative ecological strategies for climate change. We work with animals, particularly marine life and nature-based systems, to find resilient solutions calibrated to different conditions in the bay. The premise of our work is a collaborative research platform that synthesizes architectural design, marine ecology, and material innovation to develop new approaches to constructing resilient waterfront structures. The work often begins with informed speculative designs by our students in studio, placing them in sites around the bay as well as the Maldives to challenge them to think of the architectural implications of sea level rise. This work has led to the fabrication of small scale pilots to test these speculative ideas. The first prototypes took a full scale of a 2x2 section of the underwater facades of our student projects, and they were carved on the DMS at the Technology Center. You can see that in the upper left. We tested them in we tested these plates. They were fabricated by Chrysler and Associates, a partner that we developed through our residency at the Technology Center, and these were tested in the Monterey and San Francisco Bay. Over time, the results of this research led to interest and to funding of the first of its kind floating structure called the Float Lab. It's moored in the Middle Harbor Shoreline Park, which is part of the Port of Oakland. And the Float Lab was permitted as a fish enhancement device by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's been floating at Middle Harbor Shoreline Park for 1.5 years. And it continues to be a field station for us to monitor what's happening below and above the water. This time-lapse capture, which is on the Float Lab, it was a GoPro on the Float Lab, is what I like to imagine. You can see, it's hard to see in the top one, but I like to imagine the same seagull that is perched on the peak of the float lab, looking towards the city as the sun sets, and later towards the sun for warmth during the morning. So these are the kinds of things we have sensors on the float lab. We're testing different prototypes on the bottom of the float lab. And we continue to have other small scale pilots around the Bay, one of which is one I'd like to introduce next, which I wanted to introduce two of our research fellows. They are students that worked with us when they were students and continue to work with us as research fellows and residents of Autodesk Technology after they graduated. This is a project, and Sean and Marina will describe them a bit more, but it's work that we're doing in the Presidio National Park. It's an ongoing project that is part of a decade-long Quartermaster Reach restoration project to daylight the Tennessee Hollow Creek to Crissy Marsh. This project began with a pilot phase to determine the presence of oyster larvae in the marsh. And after a successful period of over 6 months floating these panels that we showed earlier, actually we floated the same panels, we learned that we were able to recruit over 100 oysters on 1 2x2 panels. So the lessons learned from these pilots were applied to the development of the final design for panels soon to be installed in the new culvert to coincide with the spring oyster spawn that will be in April. So Sean Cunningham and Marina Rosalie were instrumental in helping us develop this work. And I wanted to introduce Sean and then Marina to showcase a few of the slides, but also mostly to talk about what they gain by interfacing this work with the technology centers. So Sean. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so my name's Sean Cunningham. I graduated from CCA in spring of 2019, and I had the fortunate experience of having almost a full year with the Autodesk group, and was able to attend several of the resident meetings, and thereby gain the exposure to different engineers, being surrounded by different people, and I think I may speak for a lot of designers, but a lot of what I'm interested in is process-based design. And one thing that with these oyster panels was identifying what that process is, and then as a student learning from Autodesk what's even out there to inform sort of how that process can actually shape a physical object and how that can react to our design aesthetic, but also our design goals. Oysters don't really lend themselves to programmatic goal, but you got to think of the fish and the oysters as your clients. So how do you sort of design a shape? And then it was invaluable to sort of sit in a meeting. And I think we were presenting this one time, and an engineer was saying to me, or one of the residents at Autodesk said, "Oh, it's like the inverse of a race car, like increased turbidity." And I was like, "Oh, that's like brilliant." I'd never thought of it that way. I always thought of it as sort of like a topological map. How do you replicate their natural environment? But I think, through those experiences, being able to really do almost a deep dive into what's out there, how does that reflect now moving forward into the profession, having access to those ideas, but also the knowledge that these tools exist, both in the actual physical DMS, but also the software offered as well, and how that integrates into our workflow of design. And so Margaret, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. So I'm going to pass it on to Marina Rosalie. And Marina, we brought Marina on, and it was right before the pandemic. And so, but she had been working with Negar. So Marina, you can talk about your experiences with being a student with Negar, but also transitioning to be a research assistant with us, and the kinds of we did most of our interaction was online, so that transition to during the pandemic.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Marina. As Margaret mentioned, I joined the team a little bit later, so it was like in between the pandemic starting. So I joined the team when the plates were already designed. So the main focus that I was gonna be doing was prototyping the plates using the Autodesk machines. I started doing that, but then with the pandemic, it didn't happen. But then it was nice because I had the opportunity to work with renders and videos. So it kind of translated to something of more like how the plates will look underwater. So kind of like what you guys can see now, which was a pretty fun experiment. But then overall, me at Autodesk, I learned a lot. I think I was always talking to someone new. Nagor and probably Bobby know that we'll always take coffee breaks that would take longer than usual because we'll always meet someone in the kitchen and just start talking to them. And then either like the project that was working at CCA at the moment, or even like for Margaret and Negar, they will always help me. And then they know so much, so we'll always learn something new. So, and even now, sometimes I go to the Autodesk meetings, or even like I Slack someone, hey, can someone help me with this? Because I don't know how to do, even for like my actual job. So it's a really nice opportunity. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Marina. So I'm going to turn it over to Negar. I'm going to stop the share, and Negar will share the screen.
Hi everyone, thank you, Margaret. My name is Nagor Kalanthar, and I'm an Associate Professor of Interior Design and Architecture at CCA. And I'm leading the Digital Craft Lab with my colleague, Professor Jason Kelly-Johnson. Today, in celebration of the Academic Alliance with Autodesk Technology Center, I would like to share some of the projects that we have done last 2 years during our residency. I categorized them in 3 sections: National Collaborative Research Project, Design Research in Studio, and Independent Research by Master Student in Advanced Architectural Design in Digital Craft. The first project is a National Science Foundation project in collaboration with 3 other research teams from University of Minnesota and Texas A&M University. Despite the advance in the digital fabrication, there's still a considerable gap between what we can draw and what we can make. At this point, the process of making complex form is relatively expensive, time-consuming, and more importantly, often wasteful. So our team taught how to generalize the kerfing, a common method or technique that they use in the wood industry, to achieve moldability with a certain microstructural pattern, which is a low-cost process and suitable for building industry. While kerf cut promote flexible structure, this approach generally reduces the load-carrying ability of the panel, which may not be desirable. Our team tried to provide means to potentially turn these disadvantages of cutting method into advantages, for example, using the cut patterns to tuning the dynamic property to better resist vibration load. So the goal of the research was to present a systematic design method utilizing kerf method for generating complex freeform structure beyond simple geometries, and to investigate how to control flexibility and rigidity in the different material, and to investigate the influence of the kerf pattern on the stress and deformation field observed in the complex freeform structure, and to investigate the influence of kerf pattern on vibration and energy dissipation. Me, along with my excellent research assistant, Bobby Bracelin, we have done a lot of prototyping with different materials and fabrication tools last 2 years at San Francisco Technology Center on this project. The second national research project that we have done that I want to share today is a collaborative research on advanced material for 3D printing. In summer 2019, my PhD student Mehdi Farahbakht joined the residency in San Francisco to continue our investigation on robotic-based 3D printing and how to increase bonding between layering clay and cement printing. So our goal was to develop a novel 3D printing technique by using all robotic parameters. We explored two different scale, meso and macro in architectural form finding to improve load bearing and static feature of robotic 3D printed large scale prototype. And beside the robotic controlling processes, Mehdi developed all the tools and nozzle by himself, and he fabricated all of them in Technology Center as well. The next category that I would like to talk about is a CCA design studio that I taught at San Francisco Technology Center. As a design educator, I believe we need to rethink how to educate next generation of designer, to reimagine the process of making. For me, making is not a post-design process, but an innovative designer needs to know the fabrication process while designing. With this goal in my mind, I designed a studio named Transit Studio that has been run for 9 years. During 2019 and 20, the Technology Center in San Francisco offered an opportunity to 40 DCL architecture and interior design students of CCA to work in the facility as residents. So the Transit Studio 2019 was very unique because all our students got residency program. Students work on two projects, and the first project was working on flexible yet rigid textile structure. And the main challenge was how to make a flexible, responsive material out of non-flexible and rigid substance with using geometry. An emerging area of research would involve 3D printing, three-dimensional object that transform from one shape to another shape. Then they learned how to work with water jet, and they designed and fabricated dynamic facade systems. And in general, the studio was to represent how the alliance of academia and industry can provide a major change in the way students learn, think, and make innovative design. In the next few minutes, Mayan will talk about Transit Studio 2020, and Julius will talk about the third category of our today presentation. He was a master's student of advanced architecture design in digital craft. The MAD digital craft degree is a unique one-year program, post-professional program at CCA that unite designer, robotist, and computational thinker who want to engage and question and expand the discipline boundaries. I'll pass the mic to Mayan. Mayan.
Hi all. So my name is Mayan Greenberg, and I am now a senior but soon to be graduating from the interior design program at CCA. I had the privilege to be enrolled and take part in this class of Negar that is materiality and space, and it took place in the San Francisco Technology Center at Pier 9. This was an incredible opportunity to explore and understand materials and technology from a whole new perspective. The concept of manipulating the natural qualities of a material to gain some degree of control on its movement was very fascinating and really thought-evoking. Our process was focused on stretching fabric on the Ultimaker 3D printer bed, and later known as Princess Buttercup, we named it. We use conventional safe materials like hairspray to stretch and kind of temporarily change the material's natural quality of being flexible and kind of give it some rigidity for a temporary time. Then we 3D printed on top of it, and we had to experiment different line weights and different patterns. And every time the reveal process of washing the fabric and release the rigid quality that we applied onto it for just in order to print on it, the revealing was always surprising. And even if we thought we knew what's going to happen, the fabric moved and created new forms and moved from being a 2D flat surface into a 3D, almost like a live object, which was great. Later on, we designed a light object using these surfaces that we created with the fabric and the 3D printers. But it was almost like doing a backward design process, which first you're investigating the material and the qualities and how you can manipulate it. And then we dealt with how to create the form and put it together into a purpose of light object. The opportunity to take part in this inspiring technology center was really important step in my education personally. And I know for many of my peers as well. As people who are working in the creative world, we're always trying to think out of the box and be innovative. Having the opportunity to work with high-end technology and transform not only materials, but also the way we think about them and the way we use them was a great opportunity for me. And I hope, and I know I'm going to take it with me as I build my career as a designer. And now when I'm thinking of a new idea that might seem at first impossible, I don't think, can I do it? But I think, how can I do it? Because Negar and the Technology Center showed me that many things are possible, even if they seem impossible at first. I really, as Marina mentioned before, I really appreciated all the coffee talks that I had, and I met incredible, innovative people working on great things using technology, but also design thinking and kind of futuristic ideas that are happening. So that was amazing to be exposed to that. That's it.
Thank you, Mayan. So, Juris?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Julius. I'm a practicing architect, and I joined the Masters of Advanced Architectural Design program with digital crafts focus at CCA for 2019 and 2020 as a Fulbright scholar. Through my educational experience, I had the chance to explore and work on my independent design research, casting Oledam, under the supervision of Dr. Nagor Kalanthar. The research focuses on finding accessible low-tech fabrication methodologies to construct parametrically designed non-standard modular cast panels. The research adopts a computational design framework that simulates the sand dumps generated by an adjustable device. The design inputs for these panels are derived from design preferences and environmental control data. The technique expands upon easy to fabricate and cast techniques, targeting less developed logistical setting worldwide, thus responding to imminent needs related to climate, available resources, and economy. The research expanded on looking into methodologies to construct larger scale architectural and structural elements using a single device, which recruits sand volumes to shape the base and top surfaces orientations of the casted arches segments. My residency at Autodesk Center is a major highlight of my educational experience in the US. Besides the exposure gained in such a creative hub, the Technology Center was the experimental ground where I tested and realized my research ideas. Autodesk Technology Centers empowers innovation by providing technical knowledge, high-end softwares, tooling in a fertile creative community. I would like to express my gratitude to both Autodesk Technology Center and CCA for the amazing experience.
Thank you, Juris. So in the last slide, I want to share some of the highlights. After having this event, I reached out to all the students that had the residency at Autodesk, and I asked them to share their thoughts with me. And here I would like to mention a few of the highlights. They mentioned that being in the Trans Studio and Autodesk residency program helped them to see alternative future for designer and know how the startup life gonna look like, or being connected to the community of designer, thinker, and maker. And they were able to exchange ideas out of the silos of their own profession, work with cutting edge tools and material. And more than 3/4 of my students were women. And they found that learning technology could empower them in their professional life. Some of them are in the in this meeting today. So I would like, they participate in Q&A and share their experience as well. But before we start the discussion panel, I would like to thank the amazing team of Autodesk Technology Center in San Francisco, especially, Gabby, Mary Elizabeth, Ed, Michael, Jan, a lot of them that, made this possible. It wasn't something pre-planned. Everything happened, it was a very experimental process. They were so helpful, very, kind to me, our student, and what we achieved were, out of this collaboration. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. And before we start the panel discussion, I want to, have a few minutes that our panelists could introduce themselves. And I'll pass the mic to Rick.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Rundell. So I lead the technology centers for Autodesk, and it's so nice to hear all of these wonderful things about the facilities that we run. In addition to San Francisco, we have technology centers in Boston and Toronto. My background is I'm an architect. I was in practice for many years, and then I left to go into the technology industry, and through a series of career changes, now lead this innovation function for Autodesk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I love this conversation and where it has the potential to go. It's wonderful to see all the student work and just the impact that the technology centers and that environment has created. I myself, my background is also architecture. I graduated from Virginia Tech back in 2009 and practiced for about 10 years and gained licensure. I was made an associate architect at Machado Sovetti here in Boston, and have worked all over the globe and have had a really broad range of experience that I can now apply to my role as the network development lead for the technology centers. So I get to work across industries with executives, with designers, with startups and entrepreneurs, and bring them into the technology centers and help to shape, this environment that CCA has been involved in and contribute to kind of this thought bubble that is sharing information. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sophia. Keith, do you want to have a few words?
Sure. I'm Keith Krumwiede. I'm the Dean of Architecture at CCA, and lucky enough to be able to work with fantastic faculty like Negar and Margaret and Evan and many others that are on this call. I started here 3 years ago. I came from the East Coast. I was the assistant dean at Yale and the graduate director at NGIT in New Jersey before coming back to California. I went to SCI-Arc, so I left California many, many years ago thinking I was leaving for a one-year fellowship in Texas, and it took about 20 years to make my way back after sort of circumnavigating the country. I'm speculative architect, so it's also exciting to be involved in this project and the work that the labs, specifically these two labs, but all of our teams at CCA do in bringing their students to projects that engage them with the pressing issues of the day through emerging and established technologies that will better enable them to really attack the problems that we see our students now wanting to engage in, right? Like not seeing architecture as an autonomous kind of isolated practice, but really as a practice that can make a difference in the lives of people in the world and the lives of plants and animals in the world too, Margaret and Evan. So I'm really excited for this conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I want to ask everybody, if you have any question, please put it in the chat. Me and Margaret and Gabby try to address them in the discussion. And I want to start with a general question from Rick and Keith and Sophia, that we know that the industry and academia collaboration is not a new concept. However, it evolved dramatically last few years. And why is the emergence of academia and industry alliances important now? And what it benefits, how it benefits university, industry, and importantly, the society?
A bite. I think, a big thing is that the world is moving really fast. We have all these new types of technologies that are coming out that also involves a lot of risk. And academia has the ability to kind of take on some of that risk that industry, is uncovering, but, overhead is a huge issue. Time, the potential for failure is always evident. And academia really has this opportunity to tackle those problems, really reconsider them in a thoughtful way. And again, bringing that exposure with, new ways of thinking, new teaching styles, new ability to adopt these technologies and test, I think is so important for industry and that overlap.
I love those points, Sophia.
Follow up sort of. Am I lagging?
Yes,
You are lagging a bit.
So better now, I hope.
yes.
I'll go and then wave at me if I'm not communicating. I think that's a really great point, Sophia. And I think, looking at it from the other side, so from the side of academia, what these collaborations or opportunities to work with industry afford both our faculty, but I think more importantly our students, is a kind of grounding of that experimentation and risk-taking in the sort of issues and that industry faces daily. So it's a way of actually sort of providing a mechanism of reframing sort of the scope of the work, and I think also providing resources that are really critical that are always going to be challenging in academic environments to avail our students of some of the resources that alliances like we're forging here and that our faculty have been forging for many years with the Technology Center, which I sort of view as almost an academic space. The Technology Center, it's an experimental space for Autodesk, for sure. And so it's a perfect space to sort of look at how we might connect that risk-taking and experimentation and sometimes, wide-eyed optimism of academia with the kind of resources and sort of practical thinking about making things happen that I think happen at the Technology Center.
I'm flattered with the idea that the Technology Center is an academic space. I like that, Keith. Thank you. I bring a sort of a lens of fostering innovation in industry to this question, and it's no secret now that there's a fashion in the industry for seeking a certain kind of innovation energy from startups, hosting hackerspaces, incubators, pitch competitions, things like that. And this is seen as a way by businesses of staying ahead of unexpected disruptions and kind of inoculating themselves against unexpected changes and staying on the cutting edge and keeping things fresh. And while there's something to this, I think that it's kind of it's becoming a little overplayed. But I think industry is actually overlooking another opportunity, which we're seizing here, another very real source of innovation energy, and that's the energy provided by an academic alliance like what we're doing here together. So this is the energy of students who don't yet know enough not to ask the hard questions, the ones we think are already answered maybe, the energy and expertise of faculty who can manage those kinds of conversations, challenge assumptions, bring different kinds of thinking to the conversation, and the energy and experience of researchers who are looking for new ways of doing almost everything, new materials, new methods, how to use new tools. We use the term open innovation a lot, and honestly, I think this is the next frontier for open innovation from the industry side. I think there'll be a growing appreciation of what academic thinking can bring to businesses. And it's the next frontier for academia to discover a new kind of value beyond traditional boundaries, as your business models are challenged by demographics and the pace of change in society. And I feel so lucky that we are able to catalyze this kind of relationship with CCA through our technology centers and benefit from the students and faculty and researchers and having those in our Autodesk community.
Perfect. So that's a perfect lead into the question I wanted to ask all three of you. You both, for all of you, an architectural education was the foundation of your career path that ultimately led you to positions you hold now. So from that perspective, how could this new alliance benefit students and the future of the profession of architecture? Maybe I'll start with you, Sophia. You were mentioning how 10 years in the field, it led you now where you are now. So I think from the vantage point of being a student and knowing where you are now, how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think traditionally we go into architecture school and it's very siloed. There's a vertical path. And we're seeing a lot more and more that students are breaking that mold. And so I would encourage really that exploration of what it means and the exposure that you get as an architect. I mean, traditionally we're working with electrical engineers, plumbing, mechanical, structural. If we're lucky, we get to work with facade engineers. So really kind of, I've had that experience over my time in practice, and I was just so inspired by the cross collaboration and what that brought to my own education and in continuing that beyond school and into my practice. And that exposure really inspired me to really think about how the built environment is created. And it's through that collaboration and through different technologies and different resources. And so in my current role, I would have never dreamed that I would be able to do what I do now and didn't know the job ever existed. And it's so awesome that I can continue these conversations with different firms and even manufacturing practices, which is totally out of my wheelhouse, but it comes down to a design practice and how architects are trained to think, which is to tackle an idea. And a lot of times people have a hard time understanding where to start. And I think that's something that architects do really well. We have to start with a concept and a plan of execution. And so utilizing those tools and resources that were really kind of the foundation of how we think, I see that play such a huge role in what I do now, talking to teams, whatever the scale, how they can engage with the technology centers, how it can provide value to them, and the impact that they can achieve through these kinds of spaces and facilities and networks to really improve the environments that we live and exist in.
So you're almost expanding the conversation, the connection of the profession in ways that professionals or students of architecture might not normally see. Maybe Rick, you can build on that.
Sure, I'm really taken by the idea that the process of making something is actually the process of designing something. I think Negar and some of her students mentioned that, what we know is that the vector of innovation in manufacturing and product design, over the last couple of decades has really been driven by what it's possible to make. The ability to fabricate things has inspired designers, and that same process is emerging, I think, in architecture and the building industry. And so I think that thinking about, not only thinking about, well, how does that interesting model that I just did on the computer, how do I make that into a real thing? But, what are the possibilities of this real thing? And starting with the materiality of the thing that you're designing is going to be a fundamental skill for designers. And I see this related to a transformation in the building industry. And that is allowing the methods of building to more heavily influence design than they do today. A lot of the inefficiency in the construction industry comes from a lack of engagement on the design side from how something might get made. Architects, kind of hand that off to that's like sort of somebody else's problem. And, not all architects think like that, but there is a tradition of, not being involved in that, some of that detail. And so things like modular construction or some of the kinds of industrialized construction methods that could easily improve building are not materializing or not being realized as effectively as they could be because architects are not designing for those kinds of systems. So I see that, I see this idea that's being fostered by the studios in the Technology Center as being fundamental to transformation of the construction industry.
And so the sort of the revisiting of master builder comes back into the architect's hand in some, because it is true, what we can scale, we can make with like the Flow Lab, we can scale it this big, but it can also scale up through digital tools. And that we are much more in control of knowing what that means is very different than when you draw something and then someone else builds it and starts to see the problems of that before you maybe do. When you're iterating from small scale to large, you're actually be able to adjust to the problems along the way.
I think it's related to that. I don't think it's what I'm talking about is a return to
We do it all.
a master builder kind of mentality, right? What I see is material informing design in a more collaborative process than the term master builder would capture.
Keith.
Yeah, I think, thank you for deflecting that master builder point, Rick. I think all of those are really key aspects of this, but what I'm excited about with this alliance, particularly hearing the students talk about how they worked at the Technology Center and looking at like other courses in our curriculum where students are working in partnership with community members, with planning agencies, and a lot of this happens through the Architectural Ecologies Lab. But what I think is important and critical to this sort of developing understanding of what they can do as architects and designers who want to have agency in the world is understanding the critical importance of relationships and how one actually cultivates relationships, how one cultivates communities of care around shared interest. And so in this particular case, it's a kind of community of care around the impact of technology and the benefits of technology and our capacity to design and shape a world that we would want to have and want to leave behind. And I think that's so important. And so, to hear Gabby's presentation at the beginning and to hear the students talk about like the coffee time being as important as the tech time at the Technology Center, that they're actually like building community in a way that's different than thinking about building networks, right? It's of course there's professional benefits to it, and we want to build those networks of relationships, but really thinking about building them in service of some higher ideals and some larger objectives. And I think, the old silo, Sophia, you talked about the silo of education, the silo of architecture, didn't really allow that. And the master builder model didn't really either allow that either, right? Like you built relationships of dependent obligation maybe, right? But not of shared imagination and hope.
I think what I meant, I think the word was incorrect, but what I meant was there is something about learning how to draw something, but not really knowing what the implications are when you build it. And we are in a role of creating designs that sometimes you don't really know how it goes together. You know why it should go together, but you don't know maybe the process of it going together. So there's something about the Technology Center and this work that allows you to scale early and iterate and make changes much more like a researcher than I think you're able to do in your construction.
And I think this has been successful in all the residency iterations with different faculty and with those on this call at CCA, because CCA, that's part of the ethos of CCA, right? We are a making school. It was the California College of Arts and Crafts, architecture. We just celebrating anniversaries this year for our programs, interior design, which was interior architecture, the oldest at 50 years, but architecture undergrad is 35 and grad is 15 years. But there is an environment here where, hands-on making, experimentation in material and craft is really underlies the way we think about training architects. It's not just, the kind of drawing then being passed off. But I do think, I don't want to just, the master builder, I mean, there's value in that because there was like, I'm not remembering my history well enough, but so many of the architects we admire began as masons or something else, right? Like they had a
With your hands,
really
understand.
tangible understanding of material properties and how one worked it. And I think, you know, our students have always had this, and the Alliance affords us greater opportunities to build upon that historical strength, and to cultivate these really important relationships. I think, you know, I wasn't taught that relationships were important in architecture, frankly. I was taught that my imagination was important
Yeah.
as an architect, right? And so to sort of flip a little bit, like, you know, my co-imagination is maybe what this allows us to think about, right? That like we're co-imagining things and co-producing.
Yeah, I would add, Keith, to that. I think, you know, the access to people is just as important as the access to technology,
Yes.
if not more so.
I want to, you know, have a follow-up question about, you know, part of being in a technology center is being exposed to startups, entrepreneur that they do research as well, you know, but they have more specific agenda to, you know, achieve something. How do you compare? I wonder how, you know, research in academia and research in startups, how do you see them, you know, different, and how putting them together in one, you know, under one umbrella could help both parties? I feel like a lot of our young designer thinking about that, what's going to be their future of their career, could they do something that means to them, and how to start that journey, you know? And because you have seen a lot of them, maybe you could share some of your, you know, experience or your thoughts on this.
You know, it strikes me that these are sort of two parallel universes drawing on the same set of skills. You know, academia and startups. You know, startups pitch for funding, and researchers pitch for grants. And startups test ideas with the market and iterate, and researchers test ideas against their agendas and iterate. You know, the currency of startups is growth of their business, and the currency of researchers is growth in their publications. Startups make products that get purchased. Researchers publish papers that get cited. There, you know, you can create this kind of intersection, and it, you know, you would imagine that there would be a lot to learn between these activities, and there probably is, just from having the conversations. One thing that we talk about the sort of the community that we create around the technology centers is, you know, we don't, you know, the world doesn't need Autodesk to create an academic community. Academics have lots of ways of interacting with each other, you know, and well-established. The world doesn't need Autodesk to create a, you know, a startup community. There's also well-established incubators and accelerators. Autodesk doesn't even need, or the world doesn't need Autodesk to create a professional community. You know, architects have the AIA, and there's you know, other professional communities, but bringing different communities together is what the unique role that we can play. I've met a number of startups that have grown out of academic research, which seems like a path that a number of students start taking and researchers start taking, and they're often, you know, depending on where they're coming from, they're often encumbered by some limitations of having developed their IP under an academic umbrella. So there can be some entanglements there that are challenging. But their energy and willingness to work very hard, a certain discipline, work very, very hard, seems to have served them well in both domains. So there's, I think, transferable skills and cultural characteristics between the two domains.
Sophia, do you want to add anything, or?
Yeah, I like the startup industry. I think it's difficult because they have a very kind of straightforward trajectory in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, and in order to succeed, they have to accomplish, you know, their goal, which is to, you know, have that proof of concept, get funding, and then eventually become an established company, and then that kind of gives them the opportunity to evolve out of that space. So I feel like it might be the most constrained at times. And then I think it scales, it's a gradient. I think if we're talking about that risk again, there is that risk that they could fail, and that is the end of that startup. Or it could evolve, you know, it could change and hopefully grow out of something else. But and then the academic side, I think it's getting back to that idea of grappling with, you know, I think as Rick pointed out earlier, very similar, where the startup could evolve out of academia. So yeah, I love seeing those startups evolve out of those academic teams, because the research has been set forth and there's the idea that's been able to grow and be incubated within that kind of safer space. So
thank you. Thank you, Sophia. So
why don't I ask, we have quite a few students, and many of them are graduating soon. So I think we'll end with maybe a question to all of you, but particularly Rick and Sophia, about what do you think are possible futures for architecture graduates?
Yeah, interesting question, and one that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds. So I have always appreciated my architectural education as having helped me understand how to start working on, you know, unconstrained or loosely constrained problems. I think Sophia made this point in an earlier comment about, you know, sometimes it's like, where do you even start? Problems that, you know, it's almost unfair to characterize what we work on as problems because they don't actually have a solution. They're more like questions, and our job is to find, you know, an answer to them, an answer out of a number of possible answers. So there's there is no sort of best in architecture. There's good, there's better, and how do you take the first steps in a promising direction to, you know, in a problem that has that characteristic with some confidence? So I think the studio model not only equips you to productively attack a problem of that sort or a question of that part, but also to communicate effectively about it. So the experience of having to constantly present work and explain it, to be challenged about it, builds communication skills, both graphically and verbally, and written skills, not only to communicate, but also to influence and convince. These are life skills that can be applied, you know, almost anywhere. There's, you know, it's a terrific education.
That's like a reminder for students as they're in the throes of it right now.
What I would say though is, I think sometimes as you're coming out of school, you know, you haven't really experienced the traditions of architectural practice. You've been, you know, many new graduates aspire to be teachers because that's what they've experienced and admired for so many years, right? Others may find, you know, kind of the perceived drudgery of traditional architectural practice as, you know, well, that's not going to be any fun after what I've done in school. But there's a huge amount to be learned in continuing a career in traditional architectural practice. There is yet another frontier of knowledge to achieve, just, you know, learning the humility of solving a problem for somebody else. Somebody commented on, you know, oyster larvae as being, you know, not difficult clients, but, you know, learning how to actually meet the needs of a client is a great learning. I enjoyed, and I know Sophia also commented on her experience in traditional practice for many years. I left architectural practice not because I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. I had left because I didn't enjoy the business of architecture. So when I was becoming more of a businessman than an architect, I felt, yep, maybe time to go find something else to do. So that's a little bit of my perspective.
Super. Sophia or Keith?
Yeah, I think the practice of architecture, I think it builds so much resiliency in students. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't had a bad review, right? How do you come out of that? But I think to what Rick had mentioned, it's about influencing people, and you're really building skills to be able to do that. So imagine if you can influence someone and change their mind about an idea, or come back because of something that they said and adopt and make it better, and influence them. I mean, think about the strength that you have in being able to do that, and being able to communicate that. And I think, you know, that's about commuting impact. And if you can if you're able to do that and hone that skill, you can really apply this to anywhere in any business and any practice. So it's, I think I learned a while ago to say yes to opportunities when they come knocking, and that's kind of where I ended up, why I ended up here, and to, you know, really challenge what, you know, your profession looks like and what's valuable to you, you know, what keeps you ticking. So I think there's just a lot of different opportunities that if you say yes more, you get exposed to more. So go on more coffee breaks.
Keith, you want to follow that?
Sure.
And we'll go to question and answer after that.
Okay. I agree with the yes, but I would add a, you know, but be discerning. Because sometimes things that are presented to you as opportunities are not necessarily in your best interest. So be discerning, but I think in architectural education, actually, one thing you learn is actually to be discerning, to apply sort of scrutiny. And I think, you know, we increasingly see an activist interest in our students. I think if we look at our graduate thesis class right now, we can see that, you know, amplified. And the past year has certainly, I think, made that all the more present. And I think, you know, that brought more people to a place where they want to, you know, pursue their social and political and environmental interests through their work. But I mean, it's made it very clear that the world is in a challenging place for a lot of different reasons, and that problem-solving ability that Rick talked about, the decision-making, the communication skills that you learn in the design education really prepare you for a world as an engaged participant in society, right? As someone who can practice creatively to make change. And I think like the old definitions of how architects and interior designers work are changing. I think practice does need to evolve, certainly. I would maybe, you know, Rick, you made the point earlier about, you know, the lack of innovation in the construction industry is due to a lack of innovation maybe in the design side of that. But, you know, I think it goes both ways. You know, the construction industry still wants to achieve maximum efficiencies and will look press design to produce proposals that maximize efficiency in production. So, you know, how do we think about new ways to shape the world that might reshape practice? And it's changing, thankfully, right? Some of the exploitative practices in the industry are falling away. People are being called out on those ways, you know, groups like the Architecture Lobby and others that are bringing pressure to bear upon the way we through the architecture and engineering industries produce the world. Those practices are changing, but you can get involved in that too. There's so many places to get involved in shaping the world with an architectural and interior design education that don't all involve, like, you know, drawing up plans for buildings.
Right.
It's a super exciting time. And I think also we all recognize it kind of a terrifying time, and but it means that we can actually like make a difference.
Yeah,
you can make a difference.
Well, on that note, we're going to open it up to questions and answers. And there's a one question that I'll start off by Key, one of our students at CCA. It's really to Rick and Sophia. In the spirit of moving industry toward academic thought, in the context of this new CCA Autodesk partnership and fellowship program, are there plans or interests moving forward for research projects to be introduced by industry Autodesk to take advantage of this academic freedom, this alliance?
I would say we haven't really explored, you know, to be honest, I can't say that we've really explored that opportunity. We do, Autodesk does have a, you know, research organization with, you know, with a lot of people working on problems that are very relevant to us and our customers. And in general, even outside of the this academic alliance relationship, we only have a limited activity in terms of sponsoring research out into academic institutions. We do maintain relationships to be aware of what's going on in academic research settings, but we tend not to push research problems into academic settings.
But you support them in your, I guess the way it's done is you're supporting them in the labs themselves. Like in Boston particularly, where you have a much bigger facility to support prototyping at a large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if I understood the question correctly, it was whether Autodesk would, would present questions to academic researchers for research. I think that's sounded what the question was like to me. What we do in the tech centers is we actually invite academic researchers to use the facilities to study their problems, and we learn from observing what they're interested in, and that's a form of our maybe sort of meta research.
Keith, do you want to follow up and make sure that I presented the question correctly? I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I guess I think, Rick, I think you got the essence of my question. I was curious because it did seem like the majority of the topics kind of coming from CCA was more like quandaries, like in a specific studio. And yeah, I guess like moving forward, that if that's going to become something, that more people, I don't know, from Autodesk are interested in, I don't know, utilizing CCA's student force, or I don't know. Sounds like you also have a research programs within different
But
studios.
it's good food for thought. You're dropping a seed because we are literally launching our alliance today. So you're asking questions that could plant seeds of thought.
I think one maybe obliquely or maybe less obliquely related to your question, Key, is one thing we've talked about in the planning for the Alliance is the opportunity that this will provide, where researchers who are coming to San Francisco to work at the Technology Center can actually then partner with us at CCA to do workshops or to engage in teaching opportunities at the college. So it's not necessarily Autodesk research coming to drive, at the college, but it's outside research coming through the alliance with Autodesk to CCA. And I'm really excited about that.
That's it
allows us to kind of grow, like we talked about relationships and networks before, it allows us to sort of grow that network of shared interest.
I'll also add that, part of the role of my team is that we make those introductions with industry teams that are looking to collaborate with academic teams. And so I think, the longevity of CCA's involvement within the Technology Center speaks to the ability for the program to support that and to be able to make those introductions where, the direction aligns. So.
And I think the beauty of the center is this exactly what they're mentioning, because I think that, a lot of, when you work, there are two types of research. I think working with an NSF project that is 15 years ahead, no industry has interest now in those type of research. So that's the reason that they want to invest on those type of research. But there are, questions coming from industry that is very practical and very, addressing the real, challenges that happening. But being at Technology Center as in different role, part of being as a startup, team, being an educator, being there as different, role, I feel that the good thing about the environment is you can bring any question. There is no wrong or, good or bad, I don't know. There is no evaluation that you feel that you are under the pressure that you're working on this. There is no value in your, question. So, and being there, you can evolve your question. You can come with the seed question and then it evolves to your residency. And that's the beauty. Again, nobody asked you came with this question, now you're working on this. So that's it. I think that when we talk about the future of learning is having this potential in the environment that people can come and grow with the environment rather than just stick to one agenda and follow it. And you have to deliver this thing. So that's, environment I think is very pleasant and very I think, beneficial for the next generation of the education, collaboration.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Keith.
Are there any other questions? We could either take them in the chat, or anyone can unmute and ask a question if they'd like.
Hey everybody, my name is James Negri. I'm actually a former resident and employee of the Boston Tech Center when it was still the build space. So Rick, thank you for the opportunity to let me have that. I'm currently the lab technician in Wentworth's College of Architecture now. And so we have a very distilled down, our shops have a lot of the capabilities that the build space has, but on a much smaller scale. So we don't have a lot of metalworking in our spaces, but we do have traditional woodworking. We have additive manufacturing, laser cutting, we have a robot arm, things like that. And so given the circumstances of the past year and all the remote learning, we've actually opened up our shops to much younger students and trained them as freshmen and sophomores. And so my question is really, what successes have you had in getting younger students engaged in this at a younger stage? Because I thoroughly enjoy it. I love being able to work with these machines, jump between, develop workflows and things like that. But I find that there's a bit of a divide in that when we train students, they often don't come back. And so I'm curious as to some of the things that may have sort of succeeded in getting them engaged, keeping them engaged, and sort of getting them to understand the value that exists in these things, in that they are so approachable now and they have access to them. As students, I mean, they get trained, they can use them whenever they want. They just sign up for time and they can come use them. So any experiential sort of anecdotal knowledge would be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
Well, as Autodesk, we do engage those populations, elementary school students, high school students. We have products, Tinkercad, that's specifically, it's often used in educational environments and leads to some interesting fabrication workflows. And we work with the public schools in some of the areas that we're located, particularly in Boston. And I think we may actually have a program with Wentworth, but I'm not aware of the details of it.
I don't know how directly affiliated, but the Year 13 program came through with Digital Ready and things like that, which is a really great program to offer students. I wish it existed when I was getting out of high school. I think I would have done a lot better with that than freshman year of college.
I do get the question a lot about those students in that age range, and in general, unfortunately, the kind of the industrial nature of the technology centers in that environment, it's difficult to bring in students, younger students into that environment. It's not really a younger student safe environment, though there are places where we have done that from time to time. So, but as Autodesk, we're heavily engaged with that population.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for asking that question, James.
I don't have a question. I just I want to share some kind of experience, of my experience. And I used to practice architecture for 10 years, and I had some kind of more traditional practice or education, sorry. And then it hits me when I had this thing on construction side that maybe there is new tools, maybe sometimes we just deal with suppliers that they just give us the material and we have to deal with it and design it. But we as designers, we have more input in the construction techniques itself. As this is what pushed me to MAD program, because I was looking for space or even guidance to just put me in the right place and give me the new updated tools. And when we joined also Autodesk, honestly, it was the most amazing experience, just having this theories or thesis just applied, and you have all this space, or all these questions gets answered by the team of Autodesk and the faculty in CCA, and it was really unique thing for me. So I wanted to highlight this.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had a similar one in that when I was a resident, we made this large scale bench, and I had the idea to make a tufted pattern like a leather couch as kind of a joke. And then we actually did it on a 5-axis router, and it became a real thing. And that for me was that moment where I was like, oh, wow, this actually can happen. So I agree. I think it often is that sort of one aha moment. And so hopefully I can provide those moments for other students, because it really is incredible. I still think about it a lot.
Yes. So we're at the 20 after mark. I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but I love the last two, Juris and James, the energy that you can, oh, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna
Bobby, please.
I was just gonna mention, like, I'm so grateful for the Autodesk experience being on the peer. I was able to transition from a student into an instructor and be on the peer and work also as like a different part of point of view of the front end and the back end of being a resident and then an instructor. And so I'm so grateful for that experience. And it makes me wonder if there's an opportunity for this alliance within that system, if there could be leadership positions that are like an assistant to, or mentorship part of the program that allows for different students to be able to engage with maybe some of the shop staff to learn some of the same things that I was able to garner myself. I could see it being a benefit for both parties, not just one-sided. I think it's a benefit for both parties to be able to engage in that relationship and that community, and also creates a way for you to be able to access students in ways that maybe you wouldn't be able to access them as a shop lead or a professor. I think it's something that I benefited from, and I would love to see that continue even into the lower levels of this alliance.
So I'm going to interject one question that's on the chat that just follows what Bobby is saying here, which is how the Autodesk Technology Center, this is from Al for Honey, how the Autodesk Technology Centers may push forward more of the collaboration of academia and industry in the years to come. What kind of advancement might be considered to enhance whatever is achieved by now? So kind of in the same vein as what Bobby is. And I think we will, if each of you answer that, we'll end the question and answer, and then we'll go to the summation. So maybe you can, Keith, you want to start?
I mean, I would probably ask you and Negar to answer that more than me, because you are sort of on the ground with the students. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, faculty leads. So one thing that will be enhanced is, the hope and the plan is that our students will continue to have access there through course work with these two labs, but that the labs will also, what's that?
You were lagging just a bit.
Now I'm frozen. Okay, now I'm back. But that the labs will also be, enhance their time, and with the kind of understanding that there is, I can't remember the duration we finally landed on, but that the project can actually unroll on the pace of the projects, right? Rather than being term limited, let's say, by a semester, right? So it's twofold. It's both curriculum based and independent research based. And then for me, like I was saying before, the opportunity to work with other researchers that are coming to San Francisco to work at the Technology Center. The college plans to help Autodesk, like make sure that we can construct visa relationships and things like that to support those visitors. And I think that will be a whole new angle that we haven't had before, which I think will just change the flavor of the whole operation. And then Margaret and Negar, I know you guys have ideas well beyond anything that I've been able to think about.
Well, we are excited. This isn't the only, this is the beginning of a kind of alliance and a place to share ideas. So we will continue to have one either every semester or every year as we come up. But Sophia, maybe you can answer that too, and then we'll end with Rick.
Yeah, I think that, over the past year, we've all experienced troubles and challenges, and also overcome a lot. And one of the things that we've tried to do in the technology centers to really grow, this diversity within the program and this exposure. So we've been trying to encourage and build a more global community. And I think, again, it brings that more perspective to impact and influence, the projects that are being undertaken from different parts of the world, from different economies and different climatic challenges. So I could go on and on about the diversity that we're trying to engage and contribute to the community that I think, CCA will have a tremendous opportunity to engage with, and again, bring that global perspective to the program and to the research that you decide to undertake.
I would agree with all of those things that are said. I think one of the characteristics of the work that we've been doing together, and one thing that we, that's important for how we operate the technology centers, is that I use the phrase that we plan by doing. Where so much of what we are able to accomplish is something we couldn't necessarily have planned, but that we've discovered the opportunity for as we've worked together. That leaving a lot of room for those kinds of discoveries has been, fundamental to what we've been able to accomplish together. So often when somebody says, "Oh, well, do you have plans to do this or plans to do that?" It's, well, of course, in some ways, let's discover how those things could develop together. Let's discover together how those things could develop.
Wonderful.
I would like to add one more thing, Margaret.
Sure.
In response to the comment that Bobby you offered, I should mention our own great experience with the center. For many of our studios, for example, last fall we had Advanced Studio, and we reached out the center, and we kindly get benefit of several instructors at the center. We had class about CNC. We had class about additive manufacturing done by the center instructor. And as I know, this semester, Negar Francis, they need join the studio and offer extensive lecture again for fusion. Means that the relationship that you mentioned, Bobby, in some, I know you are aware of it, but in some extent, it's going on, means the way that shop instructor help us indirectly and do some mentorship role.
Thanks, Al. I have to admit, it was a little, well, because you're behind a mask, it was a bit muffled. I couldn't catch everything, but thank you for, and so we're gonna wind down, and I think I'm gonna start with Rick, maybe just a few sentences, after hearing the scope of questions and students, a final thought, and then Sophia, and then Keith, I'll have you close the session for today.
All right. Well, this is our first academic alliance. We've invented this together. And this is a very exciting moment. And I'm so appreciative that you are giving us an opportunity to talk about it and think about it with a group like this, with thoughtful topics, thoughtful questions. I think, we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to learn a lot around this relationship. We're going to learn a lot in the coming year just because of the circumstances that we're living through as well. But this just feels like a terrific time to be launching this. And I think, I have so much admiration for the work and the kind of the ethos that CCA brings to educating students and thinking about the profession and the future. So I'm excited. That's my concluding remark.
Thank you. Sophia.
Sure. I think I loved hearing the students' perspectives today and seeing the work that they've been able to accomplish through the technology centers, and even some of the anecdotes that really kind of challenged how they thought. I mean, we heard from Sean that an automotive person was able to really counter ideas around a topological solution. So I love hearing that, because I think it gives us as the technology centers really a pause for reflection on what we're doing right and where things can have the opportunity to go. So I'm super excited by this alliance and the work that you all are doing at CCA and the opportunities that it brings. So
thank you. And I'm going to have Negar say something before we have Keith.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yes. One thing that, is amazing, that the opportunity that we brought to the undergraduate, studies, something when we talk about research, we think, okay, PhD, startups, those type of, you have to be at the end of your thought process. You have to have, but giving this opportunity to the undergraduate students and initiating this seed in their early on education, this is what I really appreciate. That everybody were really generous with this, idea that we could have researcher in different stage of their education and being part of the community. So that's what I really appreciate that. And I'm, inviting all the students and everybody that are attending today is, you could be part, you could do the same thing. You could, reach out to me or Margaret for sharing your research idea or what you want to work on. And we will be happy to connect you to Gabby and other people here and to understand that how we can help you to achieve the same thing. So
it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
I love when you said, Rick, we learn by doing, and we are just starting to do. So, and Keith, I'm going to have you end this amazing event today. Thank you.
I couldn't be more thrilled about this alliance, and really honored that the technology centers decided to work with our faculty and with CCA to launch this. So it really is an honor to be the first alliance member with this, and hopefully it will prove itself, and I'm sure that it will, that we will actually grow this network with the other researchers and hopefully with other institutions. And Negar, I think your point is so critical. I can't think of a school where you have undergraduate interior design students engaging in research like this. And what's exciting is that we will have students in our undergraduate programs, but also up through our post-professional MAD program. So a range of people with a range of experiences, getting the opportunity to both work in this magnificent space that you all have, which amplifies the tools. I think we're similar, James, as you were describing at Wentworth. We're probably the same. We have scaled versions of these things at CCA, but not the scope that they do at the Technology Center. But then, importantly, as I said before, to meet interesting people doing interesting things that have expertise in things that they know nothing about, the students, and that our faculty are not necessarily going to provide. So I think the education of the future, if we're talking about the future of learning, is fewer boundaries, more connections, more relationships, more collaboration. And that's what this alliance really foregrounds. And in this moment, I think it's all the more important as we look to being back together in space.
Wonderful.
So thank you to everyone involved in making this happen.
Thank you, everyone.
And to the students for proving that
And
it's worthy.
Athena and Yuri, a special shout out. Really,
Yes.
they're incredible.
Athena, Yuri.
And we met many times to get to this moment. So thank you so much for your efforts. Thanks all for joining, and stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.